Shut up and sit down.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Resolute MXB Track Builder Helper video series, where I'm going over this application that I built for all you track builders out there for MX bikes. If you remember, in the first episode, we just went over a brief overview and installation of the application. So let's get started. And we are, like I said, we are going to replicate the example track for MX bikes. So if you open up your application again after previously building an app, it's going to have a quick link to the last track project that you worked on. So we're just going to quickly open that. There we go. We have a blank project, if you remember from last time. Okay, so our first step in getting our track going is we need to have a Heightmap. Again, this application is not a track Heightmap editor. You have to use Photoshop, GIMP, L3DT, World Creator, a different application for generating your Heightmap. And then we can bring it into here to be used for the other PiBoSo tools and creating our HMF and our THT files. So first things first, you just go up in the upper right-hand corner into the Heightmap section. You'll see it says no Heightmap selected. We're going to select the Heightmap. First, what I want to demonstrate is a bad Heightmap. So a bad Heightmap is going to be, it has to be this raw file, IBMPC, 16-bit grayscale image. But this one is not a power of 2 plus 1 pixel. So if you don't know what power of 2 plus 1 pixel is, let me show you that to you right now. So valid powers of 2. This is a table of all the powers of 2. For MX bikes, for your Heightmap, you will probably most likely be working in this range: 1024, 2048, 4096, 8192, plus 1 additional pixel in your height and width on your image. In most cases, almost everybody's probably going to use a 2048, which would be a 2049 or a 4097 Heightmap. The more pixels, that's just the more detail that you can get into your Heightmap. And this also will depend on how large the scale of your Heightmap is. Like, for example, a normal motocross track is probably less than 1,000 meters square. You're working maybe even 500 to 800 meters square. So probably a 2049 Heightmap is good for that. For Krakenberg, I had a 4097 Heightmap because that was 3,500 meters square. That barely gave me enough detail to create the trails. I couldn't make really fine ruts. There just wasn't enough detail in that. But when I tried to use an 8K Heightmap, it killed the performance on the game, so I just couldn't do it for that one, at least the first time that I experimented. Hopefully in the future, maybe something will work out different and we can use 8K Heightmaps. But again, I think it's all dependent on the scale and how much detail is in your Heightmap. It's going to affect the performance. But like I said, for most cases, 2049, 4097 for your Heightmaps. So again, if your scale does not fit in one of these plus 1 pixel, remember for Heightmaps, you will get an error when you try to select it. Close that, save it. I'm going to select this bad Heightmap, which is not a correct dimensions, and we're going to get this error. Heightmap is invalid. Height or width is not a valid power of 2 plus 1 value. If you get that, you know that you didn't select the image that you have for your Heightmap is not the correct size. Just verify that you have that plus 1 pixel and it's 2049, 4097 in your height and width. You can have rectangles, so you could have a 4K by 2K Heightmap. They don't have to be the same dimensions in the height and the width. As long as they're a power of 2 plus 1 pixel, you're good. So now let's go ahead and select an actual valid. I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. We don't need that anymore. We proved that that works. All right, so we selected our height map. That is a 2049 by 2049 on the X and Z axis. So that's selected. That's good. Again, the nice thing about this app, if you remember, I'm just going to show you the HMF and the THT files from the actual example track. You have to set this in 2 places. You always have to set your samples and your data and your height map in your THT and your HMF. Using this app, it does that for you right there. You don't have to do it in 2 places. It'll write it out in both files for you. All right, now that we have our height map set, our next step is to set our map scale down in this section here. This will be your IRL dimensions. So I know if you're following along with TSC, he shows you if you're doing a replica track, how to get the dimensions of your track from Google Earth or Google Maps, whatever you happen to be using. So we're replicating the example track. So we are just going to use these values here, 276 by 276 and the height of 2.2. 2.2. So again, these are your, if you want to think, if you're looking at this as an image, this will be your horizontal width, your east to west, and the Z is your north south. And your scale is 2.2 meters. That is the scale vertically from the lowest point on your map to the highest point. So 2.2 meters on this example track. All right, so that would be the first thing you have is your height map. Down below is the center lines, but logically, we wouldn't have the center lines yet until we do a couple other things to get our map built. So we're going to go ahead and do that first. Then we'll go back to the center lines in a more logical order, even though we already have the center lines from the example track already built. And again, the center lines, you don't build them with this. You're just selecting them. You have to create your center lines in the PiBoSo track tools, the track editor. All right, so our first step in creating our map, besides we just did the height map and we set our scale, we need to add some textures to our map and what it's going to look like. Autosave just happened. So a few different ways we can do it. I'll try to show you every way. The first way, you're starting from a blank project. We're just going to add a new layer. All right, so this new layer comes up. This is texture layer 0. Texture layer 0 is always your bottom. It's your very bottom layer. So as you add more textures, we're going to add another one here. This one gets put on top of it. And let me just show you what that represents in the HMF file. That's what we're working with now. We'll just look at the HMF. This is my layer 0. That's equivalent to this texture layer 0 here. Layer 1 is right there. So as we can see, this track has 6 layers because it starts with the index of 0. So there's 6 of them. So we will eventually add 6 of them. So that is what we are going to do. Let me just remove this. If you want to remove it, we'll just go over here, remove that texture layer. Yes. And we'll just go one by one so we can see what we are doing here. All right. So as we can see, textures, the only thing that is required is you need to select an actual texture file for them. So we'll go ahead and do that on this one. If you remember, we don't have any textures in our example track in our project folder yet. So we are going to go over to the example track, and we can do this a couple ways. So all the example track, all of the files that are needed, all of the texture files are in its maps folder. So I'm just going to copy all of these because I know that I'm going to need them all. And we will do that. And I'm just going to copy those in to my textures folder. Everything I need, all my normal maps, all my textures, and that's what you're going to be doing anyways as you go and accumulate textures from your sources, your online sources, or even other tracks you've worked on before. Just copy them into your project. and you will be good to go. So our first layer is our texture layer 0, is the mud treads. So we're going to pick our mud treads TGA, open that up. Gives you a little preview of what that texture looks like. If you don't want to see that preview, you can turn that off in the file settings, display texture previews. You have to restart the application for that to take effect, but that's where that setting is if you don't want to see it. All right, and our next is, again, texture layer 0. Actually, the UI doesn't prevent you from selecting a mask or setting the thickness, but the thickness and the mask are ignored on texture layer 0 because that's your last layer, and you don't want a mask where you would have an invisible height map underneath, and you know what I mean. So that is what you would, when the files get written out, I just ignore the mask and the thickness, and I think the game probably also ignores it anyways, even if you would put one there. And we will set this, the repetitions are 50 for this layer. And again, the repetitions are how many times your texture is repeated to fill up your entire height map. So that you can play with it. You know, if your textures look really big and over proportion, just make more repetitions, or vice versa. If they look too small, make less repetitions, and it'll blow up your texture a little bit so it fills out your height map with less repetitions. The thickness, again, this is texture layer 0, so we're not going to worry about it, but the thickness is in meters. So as the bike goes over that material and your texture, it's going to wear down this texture, and it'll wear it away, and you're going to see your ruts forming there, or where you're just tire tracks, you did burnouts or whatever, like in this mud tread. And eventually it's going to show the layer that's underneath this one. This is layer 0, so it's not going to show anything. It's never going to wear all the way through this layer. In our upcoming ones, we'll see that a little bit more. Again, this one doesn't have a mask, but since we're replicating the example track, it does have a wet texture. So we're going to go over to our additional settings here. And this is where we're going to see settings, and I'm going to explain these as we go along for some of these different ones. But it will have a normal map you can have, specular maps, your reflection maps, 3D grass if your layer has it, and your wet texture. The wet texture, this is the texture that gets shown when the weather is rainy. So you can have a totally different texture, and this is what's going to show for that layer when it's wet. So for this one, we are going to select our mud treads wet texture, and that gets open there. Can't see much difference between the two. It looks like a little darker potentially. And again, this is just a little tiny preview, so you can't really see the whole texture there. And again, your wet texture can also have a normal map, specular map, and reflection map. We'll get into these in a little bit, exactly what those are. But let's go ahead and just close this, because this is all that layer 0 had at this time. So now that we have at least one texture layer here, we can actually build our map file. So you see we have our map file button actually activated now. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you what that does. Just because we have it, we'll just write our project files. What the write project files does, that will show you. We look in our example track, we don't have anything except our height map now. We have no files in our build file. So let's write our project files. All right, it just wrote everything. And if we go back into our thing, we'll now see we have some more things here. We have our ini files. These are for our parameters for one of the PiBoSo tools when it creates the map, whether to use, it uses the light direction and your shadow settings. One of them is, so we build with shadows or without shadows, and that's what this option is down here. Like I said, when you're first starting out, no need to really build with your shadows, especially if you have a very large track or a lot of objects that are casting shadows. It'll just increase the build time. So let's go back. And if we go into our example track folder, this is our build folder. We now have some of these text files that get written out. We don't have our map file yet, so let's go ahead and build our map file. Because we have one texture layer, we can actually build it now. And we'll see it came up. And if we go over to our log, we can see it started the map build, it finished the map build. And we can now, if we open the map viewer, go and see what our map looks like as is. It track folder here. Let's open up our example track, and here we go. We can see this is the example track with one texture layer, our base layer, no objects or anything, but that's all you needed to do to get your height map and one texture layer in. And as we can see now, we have our map file there. That's when we built our map file. Map file is now in our build folder, the example track build folder. All right, now let's go back into that additional settings and let's explain the normal map, specular map, reflection map, and the 3D grass a little bit. So how do these get set up and which files do they get written to? These are part of the not the 3D grass, but the normal, specular, and reflection. Those are all part of the shaders for MX bikes, and they get created in something called the shader file or the .shd file. So if we look over here in mud treads SHD, that's for this texture what we're going to create. But let's go ahead and open that in a text editor and let's see what that has. So the normal map is shown in this bump section here, and we will point it to a normal map. A normal map, I'm not going to explain it too much or show you what it is, but the normal map is what gives some definition, some height definition to just a flat texture. So for instance, this mud treads probably just has a little bit of maybe some tire tracks in it, or even just the dirt clods itself. You can get, with 3D, you can fake a little bit of not an actual 3D object, but with your normal map is going to show some of that definition in your texture. This one only has a specular. The specular, so when the light system in MX bikes hits your texture, you can add a specular map in the alpha channel of your normal map, and the shininess setting it determines how focused the light reflection is. So the lower this setting, there really is no limit to the numbers, is what PiBoSo told me. The shininess, the lower. So if you go down to something below 10, it's a more softer reflection. If you have something high, I don't know what high means, but you could put 100 or 1,000. That will be a more focused reflection. So your light will look more focused, not necessarily brighter, but it's just a more focused reflection light. And again, the lower is a softer reflection on your surface. Again, I'm not going to get into too much about what a normal map, specular maps, reflection maps. That's a topic for another video. I think TFC might have even shown you a little bit in his videos what those are a little bit. So again, let's try to replicate these settings in our application here. So we're gonna go ahead and we need to make the normal map, or we're gonna select the mud treads normal. So that's all you need to do is go down here, mud treads normal, and it is going to use by default it's set up to use the same texture replications. So if this was 50 repetitions, it's going to use the same as that. I could change this if I wanted and come down here and go to 26. I don't know of a use case where you would do that. It would, to me, it doesn't make sense to do that. But most times it's going to use the same texture repetitions that you have for your main texture. Right. And our specular map. So the default is to use the normal map alpha channel. So that's the common practice. You put in the alpha channel in your normal map file, and that's where your spec map is located. If for some reason you're not using a normal map, and you don't have to use a normal map, but you wanted to use a spec map, you could then select your own map, come in here, and we'll just say it's in here. We don't want to use the normal. We could actually then disable that, and that would be it. And we wouldn't have a normal map anymore, but we could use a spec map, which is in that normal map file, like I mentioned, but we're going to use the normal map. So if I get rid of that, we're going to use that spec. It's going to ignore what we had. The shininess, they had 20 in that example file, so that's just what we're going to use there. No reflection map on this one. We'll get to that in another texture layer. We'll go down and do that. And that is it for this first texture. So let's go ahead and close that. And if we write these, so let's go back to our textures folder. Remember, we had our mud treads HTT. I'm just going to delete that because we're going to recreate it with what we just set in these settings. So let's go ahead. We write our project file, and that will write our shader file as well. So if we go back to it, we should see mud treads SHD right there, just written 11:52 a.m. Come over here and text editor, and it's back. Just the same thing that we had copied out of the example file, recreated it perfectly. So that's your shader files. Again, those are the shaders that get applied to your textures. All right, so we could continue on adding more layers, all the layers that we needed. But you're probably noticing there's a couple different buttons up here, and I want to demonstrate what those are. You know, if we're starting from scratch on a brand new track, we're going to definitely go in and add layers for each one. Well, or you could import it from an existing track. Maybe you liked your layout of your textures on that track. You could do the exact same thing. You could import all of those from an existing track into your new track, so it uses the same exact textures, all the same settings, everything. So I'm going to demonstrate that now, just for the sake of time, so we don't have to recreate all of these. We're going to go import from a file, and we need to go over to our example track. Get that over here. And we're going to select the HMF file. That's where all of these texture layers are in that MXP example track. We're going to do that. Actually, before I do that, I forgot. I think it's going to import them all with all these other ones already there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and remove these first. And we are going to go over back to there again. Let's select this HMF file, and it's going to come in. It's going to read that track file from that example track and import all of those for us. And let's see what it does. Right. All of our texture layers have been imported. It says, please review them and import the shader settings if needed. So all of this worked because all of my textures were already in my track folder. You remember we had copied all of those into our textures folder already from the example track. If you imported these and you didn't have those textures in there already, it would give you an error when you tried to build your map. It would say, hey, your textures don't exist, please copy them in. So that's what you would have to do. But if we look, we have our 6 textures. Here's that mud treads, the first one. mud, another mud, dirt, grass, sand, and gravel. All the masks that are selected for them correctly, the different thicknesses. And let's see, what else do we have here? Let's go over that next. So this one, as we can see, it's using a 3D grass. If we were to select that, it's using that grass effects. So the grass files, 3D grass files are a specific format. They are rectangular, and they have to be 4 times, the width is 4 times, I'm sorry, yeah, the width is 4 times the height. So it creates 4 individual cells. And that's just some randomization that it'll use when it replicates the 3D grass. It'll use one of those 4 cells to show you 3D grass in a certain area. Anyways, I want to show you. Let's see what happens when let's say you were creating 3D grass from scratch. We hadn't imported it, and we wanted to select the 3D grass. I'm just going to accidentally select gravel TGA, and what it's going to say is that's incorrect. The 3D grass texture width must be 4 times the height, because that gravel texture was simply it was a rectangle. So that's was an incorrect thing. So that's going to help you out there getting that error. Now let's say we wanted to select a mask. The mask shows you, that tells the game, or when you're building your map file, where to apply this texture at. And for the 3D grass, same thing. It's going to tell you where to put it. Actually, I don't have any of my masks copied over. So actually, this is a good example. I'm going to go and build let me write my file up, and look what it's going to tell me. It says, please correct the following errors before continuing. It's saying all my masks don't exist. So I need to go over to my example track. We need to go into our, all the masks. They had them in the root. So we're just going to copy those, and I'm just going to copy these. These are different masks, but I will copy them at the same time. And we're going to copy those over into our mask file as well. All right. So now if we write our project files, should be good. All right. It's done. And let's actually, what I was demonstrating is the mask files. So your masks, those also use the alpha channel of your texture file, of a image file, your Targa or your DDS file. So let's say that you're going to select a mask. Well, you know, these are all valid masks, so they will work. So let's actually accidentally select a file that does not have an alpha channel. It's going to say, this file type requires an alpha channel. Please select the file with a valid alpha channel. So that is going to help you a lot. If you accidentally, you know, people have problems, they select the wrong files, or they're not creating the correct file types with alpha channels when they're doing their masks or other types of things. Same thing would happen if, let's go over to this texture, and we wanted to select let's accidentally select a mask for our texture. It would say this file does not require an alpha channel. Using an alpha channel may have unintended consequences. Please select a file with no alpha channel. So again, that's a little bit of error handling for you. So if you accidentally try to select an incorrect file type for the specific texture or mask, it's going to tell you. Before we do something, we also, you know, we imported everything from our example track, but we also need to import our shader settings. If we go down here, none of our normal maps or reflection maps are set after we imported, because it needs to read all of those SHD files. So if we go back to our textures file, and we can look at .shd, it needs to import all of these texture shader files into these textures. So let's go ahead and hit that button. We will import the shader files. And what it's going to do is it's going to look at gravel, sand, TGA, and the paths that they are in. It's going to look for a shader file that matches the file name of that texture and import it. If it doesn't find one, it's just not going to import anything. But let's go ahead and do the import. And it's going to give you the message to import the shaders from the existing files. The shaders must be in the same directory as your textures and be named correctly. The imported settings will override anything that is already set for a matching texture. So for instance, well, I just actually hit OK. So it imported everything. And let's see, go down. Where is some normal map? There we go. Normal map was set for this texture layer 2, the dirt normal, specular map, and the reflection map was set. I'm not going to go too much into what reflection maps are. I have some information in the user manual on how to create your own cube maps, which are used as the environment maps. But that's pretty much that. But again, I imported all of our shader settings from the existing files. Now, when you're starting out, you're making new textures, you're probably not going to do that, but you could, again, if you're reusing textures from an old track, that'll come in really handy. Then you don't have to make them by hand, and you don't have to create those files again. So again, you can, when I write these project files now, it's going to write all those texture files. And if I actually did want to come in here, if I'm adjusting my repetitions, and I want to adjust the normal map, etc., just come in there and modify it. Right, so let's see. I think the last thing I'll show is, again, a little bit more of what these options are. Let's say our sand texture here, we wanted to move it to the top. It is now at the top. We'll just move that back down. We can move it to the bottom. Let's move it back to its original. If we want to insert a new texture layer above this one, below that one, let's try below. So there we go, new texture layer there. And again, remove. And let me see. Let's look at this. This little toggle switch here. These are the on-off. So let's say you didn't want to delete your texture layer. You're doing some testing, but you didn't want it to show up when you build your map. Simply toggle it off, and it will not get included into your HMF file. So we're going to turn all those on. Same thing with all of your normal maps. You can disable them temporarily. Spec map, reflection map, 3D grass, all of those things. Just toggle it off or on, and that will temporarily make sure it's not rendered in your files. So let's go ahead and let's write our project files again. And let's build our map file. We're not building with shadows. Brings up the terrain editor. And it'll take a little bit longer because we have a lot more textures now, but that's done. We can see again from our log, started at 12:05, 8 seconds. So it took 11 seconds to build that time, which is really fast compared to when you have everything. It could take a lot longer than that. But let's go back and let's look at our map viewer again. And let's see what our track looks like. Make sure it's looking good. Here we go. So this is the map file with all of the textures applied. And again, we imported it. There's our 3D grass. All the masks look like they're working. This one looks, yeah, there's the gravel. Yeah, that is it for the textures, I believe. That is a lot of information to take in. This is the most complicated tab for this application, because that's honestly that's where you're going to spend most of your work, is doing your texture work, I think, besides actually building your height map, getting your textures and your mask um, situated how you want them. So again, just remember, texture 0 is your bottom layer, and you're working your way up, adding textures on top. And that's what, like, texture layer 5 is our top layer, and you will burn through these depending on the thickness. Yeah, I don't know. That's it for this one. I think we've gone far enough for this video. Next time we will check the materials tab, and those are the actual physical materials for the physics, your sand, your soil, compact soil, grass materials. We will show you how to do that and how to import those as well from an example file. Much easier than these textures. But guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already. I appreciate all the support, and I hope this tool is helping you guys building your tracks. All right, take it easy, and I'll catch you on the next one.